Hey Riverland, how are you? Good to see you on the very last day of January with your third video lesson that you deserved yesterday, and here I am giving it to you on the very last day of January, Sunday, January 31st, and how happy I am to see one cold month give way to another cold month called February, because that's Minnesota. A little bit of an unorthodox beginning to this lesson. I arrived home yesterday from doing some errands in St. Cloud, and I saw a package on my front porch. And I thought, well, what is this? And I shook it, and at first I thought, well, this is from Riverland. They haven't sent me anything in quite a while. Maybe these are poetry books. But then I thought, well, that project's over. Those books have been distributed. And then I started thinking, hey, might this be what I've been dreaming about for months? And I also remembered I treated all my classical mythology students in the fall to the unboxings that got all my equipment, because I love that class so much. I loved you guys too, Riverland Comp 1. But I figure it's time to have an unboxing for Riverland from Riverland. So let's have a look and see what's in this box. I have no idea, but I got a hunch. Here's something you can't have in a regular classroom. A super big Wusthof chef knife. I don't want to hurt myself, so I'll be careful. I know unboxings are a thing. I've seen the internet. Saw a flash of blue. Suppose you should cut away, huh? From yourself. Oh, somebody pinch me. It's happened. What's in this box? Stuff from Riverland. Riverland apparel. Look, I got a Riverland tote bag. Holy cow, look at how bright this shirt is. I got a Riverland t-shirt. Oh my gosh, I got a Riverland. This is a Riverland honor shirt. Much cuter than our honor shirts that I wear. It's a medium, I can stretch into that. Are you kidding? This is from Kelly McCall, I think. He's an English professor and the dean of the liberal arts campus down there. He sent me a Riverland hoodie. There's a box. Oh my gosh, a Riverland pen? What could be in this box? Get out, Kelly McCullough. Look at this, you guys. He sent me a little Riverland, it's like a USB fan. I've never seen such a thing. And now I can make videos for you. Well, we'll give it a try in a minute, won't we? But first, a little fashion show.
I'm too sexy for my love, too sexy for my love, love's going to leave me. So sexy it hurts, and I am too sexy for Milan, too sexy for Milan, New York and Japan.
Well, I'm done being silly. Look, I'm professional again, focused. When I got done just trying to make you laugh once in a while, while doing that, I had a thought that made me sad. One of the meanest things I probably said to any high school teacher. You've heard this before maybe. I had a teacher one day say, I was such a smart aleck. I wish I hadn't done this. I had a teacher say, you know what, I'm a teacher, not an entertainer. And I remember saying, could you be both? Could you try being both? And the reason why that was mean is because the answer was no. So, making myself sad, maybe not you. Relatively simple day now that that satire is over with. I'd like to read a poem to you by the great Raymond Carver, an American poet who was a complete maniac. I mean, he was a crasher of cars, a wrecker of marriages, a bouncer of checks, a terrible, terrible drunk, until he met the American poet Tess Gallagher. And that happens sometimes with a writer. It happened to him. It happened to Heinrich Ibsen, etc. Guy's out of control, and then the right woman comes along and just grabs him by the collar and says, oh, could you please knock this off and be a great American writer? And Tess Gallagher more or less saved Raymond Carver's life. We lost him too early because of a brain tumor. And I'd like to read one of the most important poems of my life to you by him. I had a very powerful spiritual experience this weekend. I don't have very many of those, and I'm going to keep real quiet about it. You don't need to hear that story. But it involves the Father-Son paradigm, and it also involves water. So I need a poem with water in it, and a father and a son. And I know you'll forgive that. It's a heck of a poem, believe me. I also want to tell you the same story that I told for my third Comp 2 sections on Friday. Again, trying to keep up with 3 lessons for them a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday live, and then 3 for you. And I wanted to tell a story because, a particular story for a couple of reasons. On Friday, I always feel like I need a better story than usual. I'm a storyteller. That's how I make my living. And you can teach through narrative. I've done it long enough to know that from long experience. And there's a couple of things, a couple of purposes that I've put the story to for a number of years right now. And it is not an easy story. I'll put it to you in the form of a story and also the form of a prayer. And pray that you never, ever take a class that blows up. They can do it. Sometimes classes just explode in the wilderness of the classroom. And I hope that never happens to any of you. Most often they just end kind of strangely. We stand up and, wow, this is over. And we all kind of head out into the hallway and it disappears like water into water. But I had a class go really badly once when I was very young. And it was a research class. And this is only a Comp 2 story. People who take more than one class from me up in Brainerd know that sometimes my stuff bleeds back and forth. Not this story. This story stays in Comp 2 and Comp 2 only. And then there's a few things that I want to tell you about Antigone. Some things that I want you to know about that play. You got to read that in the next couple days, by the way. I'll let you know that on D2L. Raymond Carver, The Trestle. It's a little bit longer. Sorry for you who maybe don't like poetry very much. Maybe this will pull you in. Raymond Carver, The Trestle. I've wasted my time this morning, and I'm deeply ashamed. I went to bed last night thinking about my dad, about that little river we used to fish, Butte Creek, near Lake Almanor. Water lulled me to sleep. In my dream, it was all I could do not to get up and move around. But when I woke early this morning, I went to the telephone instead, even though the river was flowing down there in the valley, in the meadows, moving through ditch clover. Fir trees stood on both sides of the meadows, and I was there, a kid sitting on a timber trestle, looking down, watching my dad drink from his cupped hands. Then he said, "This water's so good, I wish I could give my mother some of this water." My dad still loved her, though she was dead, and he'd been away from her for a long time. He had to wait some more years until he could go where she was. But he loved this country where he found himself, the West. For 30 years, it had him around the heart, and then it let him go. He went to sleep one night in a town in Northern California and didn't wake up. What could be simpler? I wish my own life and death could be so simple, so that when I woke on a fine morning like this, after being somewhere I wanted to be all night, somewhere important, I could move most naturally and without thinking about it to my desk. Say I did that in the simple way I've described, from bed to desk, back to childhood. From there, it's not so far to the trestle, and from the trestle, I could look down and see my dad when I needed to see him. My dad drinking that cold water, my sweet father. The river, its meadows and firs, and the trestle. That, where I once stood. I wish I could do that without having to plead with myself for it and feel sick of myself for getting involved in lesser things. I know it's time I changed my life. This life, the one with its complications and phone calls, is unbecoming and a waste of time. I want to plunge my hands in clear water, the way he did, again and then again. I've read every one of his poems from All of Us, the collected poems of Raymond Carver, and that gives me a little bit of an ethos to tell you that one is his best. That's his finest poem. All right, let's tell a tale here that I've been telling for a while. It stars a long ago younger version of me, and I'll just get going on it. It's this. When I was a boy, as I know I start a lot of sentences that way, I gotta stop saying that. I triple majored, I've already told you. I took a degree in history, a degree in the humanities, a degree in English, etc. And for my history degree, and I decided not to go up that road, although every teacher is a teacher of history, right? We all teach the history of our subjects. Spring of my senior year in 1982, all the history majors, and there were about 20 of us, were obligated, like all the history majors that go through that place still, to create a capstone project. That's a big research project. And this is a research class, so why not talk about it? And the project was big. It was supposed to be 30 to 35 pages in length. That's a long paper for an undergrad. And I don't fully exactly remember what happened, but we got news that year that the teacher we were supposed to have in the spring was not going to be able to teach the course. And I'm more than a little bit embarrassed to report to you that we weren't happy with the choice that was made that spring by the history gods. We were told that our teacher that spring was going to be a professor, a young woman, newly minted PhD, as I would call her, named Annette Atkins. And we're like, what, Annette? We all wanted, we hardly knew her, and that's the embarrassing part. And what we really wanted, were one of the heavy hitters in the department. I wanted Dr. Father Alexander Andrews. I loved that guy, one of the last of the politically incorrect teachers at St. John's. He's sleeping in the earth along with all the rest of the politically incorrect teachers. We wanted Dave Bennett. We wanted Ken Jones. But that didn't happen. So, and this is a seminar, by the way. Seminars that's where the teacher doesn't exactly own it. You got to talk a lot. It's student-centered as opposed to teacher-centered. So we all show up on that first day, on a cold day in January. I have very vivid memories of this class. And she came in, and I think we were trying to open our hearts to whatever she was, going to bring our way. And she folded her hands and began class with this question. And by the way, we're all in a circle. We're sitting in a perfect circle. Beautiful classroom, quad 354, red brick, tall ceiling. Windows facing west. A lot of sunlight in that room. And she asked us a dead simple question. She said, what is history? I'm like, wow. So, and we tried. And I think that first day we did a pretty good job. 70 minutes of trying to answer that question. What is history? And we had been trained to think like historians. I don't remember much about that first day other than that we made a pretty, a good faith effort to try to answer that question. 2 days later, the class met every other day. She came in, same question. Same question on the third day, on the fourth day. And pretty quickly, the questions started tuckering us out. Meanwhile, she had ordered a number of books for us I just missed the memo. This is pre-email days, no internet, imagine that, or not much of one. And what we were used to as historians and what we wanted were these big, thick history books, textbooks, written by major authorities in the ivory tower, so to speak. Books written by dudes, men and women with bow ties, or you know what I'm talking about, experts. And we wanted them thick, and we wanted lots of chapters, and we wanted a big bibliography in the back of each book. And I remember one night sitting in third grade going, why am I reading this? What kind of history is this? I asked myself, why am I reading a badly written diary from a woman who came over on the Mayflower? Well, I'll reveal what she was up to in a minute. I just didn't get it. My 22-year-old kid didn't get it. A little bit in self-defense, I was out of my mind. Senior year, you all know about senioritis, right? You're a senior in high school, you're a senior in college, and then you're not a senior for a long time until you're a senior citizen. And I was just kind of antsy, and it was a mess. I didn't want to graduate. I didn't want to leave St. John's. I was trying to steal my best friend's girl, and I did that. She's over in the guest house being the church secretary right now. That was a big project. Being a traitor, had my hands full. And I was already deciding, I don't want to be a historian. I want to live my life in literature. And I wrote a crap paper, like I think most of us did, on Emma Goldman and the anarchists of the 1890s. And that paper was a disaster. And it just, you guys, the class just went downhill. I mean, it just went downhill. And we somehow got through the spring. Oh, I was in a band too that was very successful and thinking about going professional. And we didn't do that. One guy did, but we didn't. We took up different lives. Being a musician is hard. And let's just cut to the last day. The weeks go by, we move to the semester, through the semester. And on the Friday before graduation, this is the day before graduation, we all came in, we took our seats in the circle. She came in and she had all her stuff in a pile. And it was tense. You know, the old, you could cut the air with a knife like butter. That's how, it was bad. And I was sitting here thinking, okay, now what's going to happen to us? And you know what obviously you know what she did. You know where this is going. She asked us again, what is history? Nobody said a word. Nobody said a single thing. And she brought it to bear on a dear friend of mine, Tom Dondelay. Long hair, beard, his arms were crossed. He was kind of angry. And she said, Tom Dondelay, what is history? And I looked at Tom thinking, please say the right thing. He did not. Tom said the last thing he should have said on earth. He said, what is history? What is history? History is an endless succession of random, unconnected human events. And we were all like, oh, no, wrong. That's not the thing you say. That was the wrong answer. And that was it. It was all over. And this is what I hope never happens to you. She was so hurt and so upset and so exhausted by our kid brains. This newly minted PhD and Dr. Professor Annette Atkins stood up with all of her stuff and went to the center of the circle and started to spin with this accusatory finger. And she said three things to us. She said, really hurt. We hurt her. She said, you have all failed me. You have failed me as people. You have failed me as students. And then with her lip going and her beginning to cry, she said, you have failed me as historians. And then she took all of our stuff and heaved it up lifted it as high up towards the ceiling as she could. She wasn't very tall. And she just hurled everything to the ground. Her books, her notes, all our crap papers that she had gift wrapped up, passing grades on so we could graduate. And she went flying out of that room, angry high heels on what was a wood floor back then, maple. And then Tom said something else he should not have. He said, what up? You know what? He used the B word, and it's too nice a day to say that. And that was it. We're like, wow, is this how undergraduate school ends? This is how it ends? This is the last, and it was the last class for all of us, the last minute of class. And from then on, it was just silence. We sorted out our papers, we picked up our stuff, and we went back to our dorm rooms. And I remember going out in the woods that day, upset with myself that I didn't help her. Now, the story has a good ending. And there's two takeaways for you that I'm going to put before you. The epilogue is this. A few years later, when I got back to St. John's, when I was 29 years old, because my head just was a wheel-spinning exercise to get back to that absolutely beautiful campus where I spent 21 years, much of my life. When I got back there, finally teaching at the prep school doing a little bit of university teaching, I avoided her at all costs. If I saw her on campus coming towards me, I would veer and go in another direction. I was hiding from her. If I was going down the hallway and I saw her coming at me, if I couldn't duck into a classroom, I would turn and talk to whatever student was with me. And then there was this day where I was in a copy room. In those days, they wouldn't let teachers near the copy room. You had to fill out these little forms, and students would make your copies, and you'd fill out the form and go back and get them. And I'm filling this form out, and the door squeaks a little bit, and I turn, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's Annette. She's here. Annette's here. And I looked away from her, and she approached me, and she put her hand on my shoulder, and she said, Jeff, is that you? Is that you, Jeff? And I turned around, and there were tears in my eyes, and I started crying. Not like bawling crying, but I was upset. And she said, why are you crying? I said, I have owed you an apology for 7 years. She's like, what are you talking about? I I was there. I was in that class that blew up. And she was so gracious and so kind. She said, there's no need for you to apologize. You didn't cause that. I said, but I didn't help you, did I? I was silent. Therefore, I was complicit in a class just degrading and blowing up. I could have helped you. Why didn't I? She threw her arms around me and she gave me this gracious historian hug. And she said, look, I was a brand new teacher. You were 22 years old. Maybe I overreacted that day. It's not that big a deal. And we're here. We're teachers now, and you're here with us. How did I not know you were here? I'd been there a couple of years, actually, at that point, or a year. And I was so overwhelmed by her kindness, by her ability to forgive me. It would be some years before I would hear the American poet Lee Young Lee, the first poet of my Verse Like Water series, tell me into my truck that forgiveness is the most important of all human activities. And she knew that. And to finish this part of the story, she said, can you tell me how Tom is? I've wondered for years how he is. And I said, you know what? He's a PhD in history. He teaches at the University of California, Berkeley. He's got books out. He's got papers out. He became the greatest teacher in a room full of teachers. And that made her so, so very happy. The two takeaways, two things. Number one, if you ever have a teacher that you are unhappy with, if you're ever looking at a teacher going, this man or woman doesn't know what they're talking about, I'm bored, I'm not getting anything out of this, etc., try to suspend judgment. You might be wrong. Teachers and students judge each other all the time, and sometimes we're right and sometimes we're wrong. And I misjudged her, and I regret that, and that's why I'm in my Dante-esque punishment. I'm consigned to talking about this for years, to make this, to atone, so to speak. Hold off on judging your teachers. Your doubts about them might be justified, or you might have a few years go by and look back and go, wow, she did know what she was doing. She did know how to teach. And just leave your heart open to that. Suspend judgment, withhold it, and let some time go by. You might be surprised. Another important thing, when you're writing a research paper, and I need to embed this in your consciousness somewhere, what Annette was trying to teach me, and I'm trying to teach it to you, is Annette understood the importance of primary sources, okay? She knew that giving us a diary written on the Mayflower coming over from England, or whatever country it came from, I think England, that was a way to acquire history. Maybe the woman, the wife of whoever on the Mayflower, coming to the United States, that person understood what it was like to be on that boat. They understood. If you're reading about the Mayflower from some historian is writing about it years later, that's a secondary source. Primary means they're there. The source is there. Secondary means in the distant future. You've got to get this. Primary sources are essential. I've got it here. I'm looking at it. I'm looking up in the corner of one of my shelves, and I can see, for examples, I can see The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, written by a dude named Gibbon. You can read it. It's like 8 volumes. It'll crush you flat. But Gibbons wasn't there, was he? He was writing about it many centuries later. The fall of the Roman Empire. He's a secondary source. That's a secondary source. But if you pick up Plutarch, he was there. He lived during the Roman Empire. He saw the knife go into Caesar's head when Brutus assassinated him on the steps of the Roman Senate. He could see it with his eyes. That's a primary source. And for your purposes, just to give you an example, like let's say you want to do hypothetical. Let's say your hero project at the end of the semester, let's say you decide you want it to be about male heroes in the fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm. Okay, you can get a secondary source. You can get scholarly sources on JSTOR. We'll talk about that weeks from now, from some database. And you might get some help, or you might dig a little bit and get copies of letters that the Grimm brothers wrote to one another in Germany while creating those freaky fairy tales. Three Blind Mice, Hansel and Gretel. Those are all hero stories that also have villains in them, like Little Red Riding Hood. Get it? Reading the book or reading the article from JSTOR is secondary. Reading one of the brothers Grimm writing a letter to the other Grimm brother, I can't remember their first names, Jacob, that's primary. In a few weeks, strive for that. Remember that, will you? So that's the point of the story. Don't misjudge a teacher and understand that Annette Atkins knew what she was doing as she was becoming one of the top historians on Minnesota history. That's what she became. NPR, even though she's retired, Minnesota Public Radio is constantly calling her. I'll hear her voice on the radio and I go, there's that teacher that I misjudge. Talking to several million people in the state of Minnesota. Let's to make sure this comes in under 30 minutes, let's just keep it, my comments. Let me try to constrain my comments on Antigone. The most important story of the three plays by Sophocles, the hero stories that we kicked this off with, tragic heroes rather. The three things are, this is obviously the battle between Creon and Antigone is intense. And that's a man arguing with a woman, okay? It's a dead simple story. Antigone, grown up now, is upset because her brother Polynices has been slaughtered. He's dead, and he's laying in the sun. He's a rotting corpse outside the walls of the city. And the Greeks believed that if you didn't get a proper burial, that was it. Your soul would be tormented forever. So she has a religious obligation, a felt sense that she's got to get her brother buried properly with the libations and all the ritualistic behavior towards the dead that the Greeks were famous for. Creon, he's got a job to do. He's driving the truck now. He tells us in the first play, Oedipus, that the last thing he would want is power. But here he is in charge, isn't he? And for him, Polynices is a traitor. He's betrayed the city, horrifically killed by his brother on the battlefield. And they didn't know they were fighting each other because they were wearing masks, okay? Thing number two. I'm repeating a very important idea from Friday from my Comp 2 hero students up in Brainerd. A lot of times, reading rhetoric and philosophy, you can get some help on how to live. That can be instructive. A lot of times in literature, though, you pick up stories and, well, you can learn how to live, but you can also learn how not to live. You can read a story and go, wow, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do what that man or woman did in that story. And you can also pick up a story sometimes and go, that would never happen to me. No way. That could never happen to me. I'm not trying to doom you. Or maybe I am. Or actually, maybe I'm just reaching for what I'm always reaching for, which is the truth. It is almost a certainty that you are going to live what Antigone is living through in this story, even though she's make-believe. There's a lot of great truths in these old classical stories from antiquity. And what you'll live is this. You're going to look up one day, and you might be in a neighborhood, you might be in a relationship, you might be in a marriage, or you might be in a workplace, you might be in a job, in a career. And you're going to look up one day, and you're going to realize, gradually or suddenly, that there's a tremendous incongruity, a collision, an incongruity between the inner values in your human heart, what you think and what you feel and what you believe in, and the values of the world that you're living in. Let's call it a corporation. What are you going to do in that day? What are you going to do when there's an incongruity between your values and the values of your employer, for instance? You need to prepare for that day, because that is, at least speaking personally, that's the story of me getting fired from St. John's Prep School. That's exactly what happened to me, and I never saw it coming. Prepare for that day, will you? I know it's not the most fancy audiovisual aid that I've used, but I know what you're thinking. Whoa, he's packing foil. I think I've already mentioned that foil is actually a literary concept. A foil is when one character reflects against another, maybe in collision. So there's Creon is the foil of Antigone. And early in the play, you'll see that Ismene is the foil of Antigone too. Antigone is a woman of action. Ismene's freaking out and she's a scaredy cat, so she doesn't want to help Antigone at all. There's a strange lack of foil between Haman and Antigone because they're supposed to be engaged to be married. But Antigone doesn't seem very interested in him, does she? And there is quite a foil between Haman and his father, Creon. He says to him at one point in the play, it's one of the great lines of the play, comparing his father to a tree. He says something like, if you don't bend, if you don't relent, you're going to break, Dad. And Creon does, I'm not going to finish that sentence. Who wants to wreck a story? So let's conclude this. I'm looking forward to seeing you for another week. 3 videos coming at you. I will get this edited here, and I got to review my dance moves and see how if they're still holding together. I can always reshoot those scenes, and I couldn't do it to the music, right? Because I got to lay it into the editing later. So never mind. Thanks for carving out a little time to be with me today. I love you guys. God bless you. Stay safe and sound in the time of trials.